The air in the Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility, or SCEF, was always cold and sterile, smelling faintly of ozone from the humming server racks. It was a world of whispers, secrets, and the relentless glow of data streams. This was the natural habitat of Staff Sergeant Lena Petrova. She was a figure of quiet intensity, her slim frame folded into an ergonomic chair, her focus absolute as she parsed raw signals intelligence from a dozen different collection assets. To the combat armed soldiers who made up the majority of forward operating base vigilance, she and the other analysts were hobbits, pale creatures who lived in windowless caves, rarely emerging into the harsh, sun-bleached reality of the Afghan mountains. They were a necessary but largely invisible part of the war machine. Petrova preferred it that way. She was not here for glory or camaraderie. She was here to do a job that required precision, patience, and the ability to find patterns in chaos. Her work saved lives, but it was anonymous. The victories measured in canceled patrols and avoided ambushes, successes no one would ever celebrate. The base commander, Colonel Marcus Thorne, was the antithesis of Petrova's quiet world. He was a man carved from the bombastic granite of old-world military tradition. A decorated infantry officer with a chest full of medals, he carried himself with the swagger of a man who believed his own legend. He saw the world in a simple binary, warriors and support, and he held the latter in open contempt. During his weekly base-wide briefings, he would pace the stage like a caged lion, his voice a parade ground bark that echoed through the packed hangar. He spoke of valor, of aggression, of the killer instinct. And he would invariably find a moment to belittle the chair warmers and paper pushers who, in his eyes, were a dilution of the warrior ethos he held sacred. He thrived on fear, using public humiliation as his primary tool of leadership. He would single out a soldier for a loose strap on their gear or a misplaced tool, dressing them down with a vitriol that left the victim trembling and the audience silent and afraid. He was building his kingdom, and the first law of the land was that Colonel Thorne was never to be challenged. Thorne's corrosive attention eventually turned to the intelligence section. He saw their quiet, academic work as a sign of softness, a vulnerability in the armor of his FOB. He began making unscheduled inspections of the SCIF, his large, disruptive presence a violation of their sterile, focused environment. He would stand behind analysts, his breath hot on their necks, questioning their assessments with a layman's belligerent ignorance. He couldn't understand the nuances of their work, so he dismissed it as irrelevant. His focus, for reasons Petrova couldn't fathom, soon narrowed onto her. Perhaps it was her unwavering calm in the face of his blustering, a placid surface he felt a compulsive need to shatter. He started with small things. He publicly ridiculed one of her intelligence summaries in a command briefing, calling it cowardly for suggesting a cautious approach to a planned operation. It turned out her intelligence was correct, and a patrol that ignored her advice was lucky to escape with only one vehicle damaged. Thorne never acknowledged it. Instead, his harassment escalated. He assigned her and her team to demeaning manual labor details, tasks usually reserved for punishment. They spent a week cleaning the base's foulest latrines, their highly skilled hands, usually tasked with decoding enemy communications, scrubbing porcelain with bleach. Through it all, Petrova remained impassive. She completed every task without complaint, her face a neutral mask of compliance. She did her work, she scrubbed the floors, and she returned to her bunk at night, her composure absolute. Her refusal to break, to show anger or fear, acted like fuel on the fire of his arrogance. He saw her silence not as discipline, but as a silent challenge to his authority. He became obsessed with forcing a reaction, with proving that everyone on his base, even the quiet analyst in the SCIF, was subject to his power. He was a man hunting for a breaking point, unaware that the person he was targeting didn't have one he could possibly comprehend. The breaking point came not in the field, but in the supposed sanctuary of the barracks. Thorne, on a self-aggrandizing health and welfare inspection, stormed through the female enlisted quarters, his sycophantic executive officer trailing in his wake. He was looking for a pretext, a weapon to use, and he found it at Petrova's bunk. It was a minor infraction, a book left on her neatly made bed, but to Thorne, it was the opening he craved. He picked up the book, a worn copy of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, and sneered. Philosophy? There's no philosophy in a firefight, Sergeant. Only action. He tossed the book aside and turned his attention to her footlocker. He declared it disorganized, a clear violation of base regulations. With a theatrical heave, he flipped it over, scattering its contents across the floor. Her neatly folded uniforms, her spare set of boots, her personal letters, all of it lay in a heap. His eyes fell on a small, simple wooden picture frame. He picked it up. It was a photo of a smiling, middle-aged couple, her parents. "What is this sentimental trash?" he boomed, his voice resonating with manufactured rage for the benefit of the other soldiers who were now watching in fearful silence. "There is no room for weakness on my base." Before Petrova could react, he threw the frame to the floor and brought his gleaming combat boot down on it with a sharp crack of splintering wood and shattering glass. The sound was small but shockingly violent. He then grabbed her packed duffel bag, heavy with her freshly cleaned uniforms, and strode to the communal shower block at the end of the hall. With a final, contemptuous look at her, he hurled it into one of the stalls and turned on the water. The act was one of supreme degradation, a calculated violation designed to strip her of her dignity, to reduce her to nothing in front of her peers. It was an attack not on Staff Sergeant Petrova the soldier, but on Lena Petrova the human being. He had taken her personal space, her personal history, and her personal property and defiled them all in one swift, brutal display of power. He had made his point. He had proven that he could do anything he wanted to anyone. Colonel Thorne stood for a moment, basking in the terrified silence of the room. He had done it. He had finally cracked the analyst's stoic facade. He expected tears. He expected a choked sob. He expected a flash of angry defiance that he could then crush, completing his victory. He received none of it. Lena Petrova stood perfectly still amidst the wreckage of her belongings, her face as calm and unreadable as ever. Her eyes were not on him, but on the shattered picture frame on the floor. The other soldiers in the room held their breath, caught between the magnetic poles of a tyrant's power and a victim's inexplicable composure. Thorne felt a flicker of unease. Her lack of reaction was more unnerving than any emotional outburst would have been. He had detonated a bomb, and it had failed to make a sound. With nothing left to feed his rage, he grunted in disgust. "Get this pigsty cleaned up," he snarled, then turned on his heel and stormed out, his XO scurrying behind him. The moment he was gone, the tension in the room remained, but its nature changed. The soldiers looked at Petrova, then at each other, their expressions a mixture of pity, shame, and fear. No one moved to help her. They were all prisoners of the same system, all cowed by the same man. To help her would be to paint a target on their own backs. Petrova seemed not to notice their paralysis. She knelt down, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were collecting forensic evidence at a crime scene. She carefully picked up the splintered pieces of the wooden frame. Then, with painstaking care, she began to pick the tiny, glittering shards of glass from the photograph of her parents. She ignored her soaked duffel bag, which was still being drenched in the shower. She ignored the scattered uniforms. Her entire focus was on this one small, damaged object. She managed to free the photograph mostly intact. There was a small tear across her father's face where the glass had pierced it. She looked at it for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, she carefully folded the photo, placed it in her breast pocket, and stood up. She walked to the shower, turned off the water, and dragged the heavy, sodden bag back to her bunk. Without a single word, without a single glance at the other occupants of the room, she began the methodical process of cleaning up the mess he had made. Her calm was not the sign of a broken spirit. It was the chilling calm of a tectonic plate shifting deep beneath the earth, preparing for an earthquake. That night, the lights in the SCF burned late. Petrova sat at her terminal, the only person left in the cavernous, chilled room. She had completed her required duties for the day, filing the last of her intelligence reports with her usual, flawless accuracy. Her colleagues had offered her quiet, awkward words of sympathy, which she had accepted with a polite, dismissive nod. They thought she was coping. They had no idea what was truly happening. When she was certain she was alone, she initiated a series of commands, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. She bypassed several layers of routine security, accessing a deeply encrypted personal partition on the secure server, a digital lockbox that not even the base's system administrators knew existed. She wasn't drafting a report to the Inspector General. An IG complaint would be his word, a colonel's decorated record, against hers, a staff sergeant's. It was a battle she could not win on that playing field. He expected her to fight him on his terms, in a world of rank, bluster, and subjectivity. He was a fool. She was going to fight him on her terms, in her world. A world of data, evidence, and irrefutable fact. She began to do what she was trained to do at a level Thorne couldn't possibly comprehend. She was not an analyst. She was a hunter. And her hunt for Colonel Marcus Thorne began. She started not with him, but with his ecosystem. She pulled the last 5 years of procurement contracts for every base he had commanded. She downloaded thousands of pages of travel vouchers, expense reports, and temporary duty assignments for his entire command staff. She accessed the unredacted after-action reports from his deployments, focusing on logistics and supply chain data. It was a mountain of information, a blizzard of white noise to anyone else. To her, it was a landscape, and she was looking for the tracks. The work was painstaking, requiring immense concentration. She cross-referenced names, dates, and account numbers. She wrote complex algorithms to search for anomalies, for patterns of behavior that deviated from the norm. She was building a web, and she was doing it in complete silence, a digital ghost moving through the deepest, darkest corridors of the military's bureaucracy. The first thread appeared after 3 nights of relentless work, a pattern of fuel requisitions, on 3 separate occasions during his command at a previous posting in South America. Colonel Thorne had signed off on emergency fuel shipments that were far in excess of the base's operational needs. The fuel was delivered, signed for, but a significant percentage of it never made it into the base's storage tanks. It had simply vanished from the records. The cost to the government was over $500,000. Petrova kept digging. She found the name of the shell corporation that had supplied the fuel. A quick, encrypted search of international business registries revealed its board of directors. One of the names was a man who shared a last name with Thorne's wife, his brother-in-law. It was a classic kickback scheme, brazen and arrogant. The second thread was more personal. She analyzed personnel transfer records for every female officer who had served under Thorne's command for the past decade. She found a distinct pattern. 9 women, all highly rated, had filed informal equal opportunity complaints citing a hostile work environment. In every single case, within weeks of the informal complaint, the woman was transferred to an undesirable post, their careers effectively sidetracked. The complaints never became formal. They were buried, and the problem was transferred away. Thorne hadn't just been a bully. He had been systematically destroying the careers of women who dared to question him. The final thread was the most damning. It was a procurement contract for upgrading the perimeter defenses at FOB Vigilance itself. The contract had been awarded without a competitive bidding process, using an emergency waiver signed by Thorne. The recipient was a defense contractor whose primary lobbyist was a retired general, a close friend and mentor of Thorne from his days at West Point. The cost was 30% higher than the initial engineering estimates. Petrova hacked into the contractor's internal servers, a highly illegal act, but she was past caring about such distinctions. She found the internal emails. She found the correspondence between the lobbyist and Thorne. She found the proof of collusion. She was not just an analyst anymore. She was judge, jury, and in a way, executioner. She compiled everything into a single, encrypted file. It was a digital bomb, cross-referenced, annotated, and utterly irrefutable. It was the end of Colonel Marcus Thorne's career, and he had no idea it was about to detonate. Deep within a secure facility at Fort Meade, Maryland, an alarm that had not sounded in 3 years began to flash on a monitoring station at U.S. Cyber Command. It was an automated threat detection system known as Cerberus, designed to do one thing: detect and flag high-level, anomalous internal data queries that targeted senior officers. The system had registered a pattern of searches originating from a single terminal at FOB Vigilance, all focused on Colonel Marcus Thorne, that were far too deep and too specific to be routine. The system flagged it as a potential insider threat, an act of espionage. The matter was immediately escalated. A name was put before Brigadier General Elizabeth Reed of the Inspector General's Special Investigations Unit. General Reed was a legend in the JAG Corps, a woman with a reputation for being surgically precise and utterly incorruptible. She had taken down two-star generals, defense contractors, and anyone else who thought they were above the law. She looked at the report. A staff sergeant, an intelligence analyst, was using her access to conduct what looked like a deep-dive opposition research campaign against her own commanding officer. Reed's first assumption was that Petrova was a foreign agent, or perhaps a disgruntled soldier looking for leverage. She booked a flight on the next transport to Afghanistan. Her mission was to investigate a security breach and neutralize a potential threat. Back on FOB Vigilance, Thorne had grown even more arrogant. He saw Petrova's continued, quiet compliance as his victory. He believed he had broken her, that she had learned her place. He had even joked about the incident with his XO, bragging about how he had instilled discipline in the intelligence section. He was a man standing on the lip of a volcano, admiring the view, completely oblivious to the pressure building beneath his feet. He had humiliated a soldier in the barracks. He had no idea that in doing so, he had triggered a response from one of the most sophisticated digital hunters the entire United States military apparatus possessed. General Reed was coming for the spy. She had no idea she was about to meet the prosecutor. The arrival of a brigadier general on AC-17 was an event that sent ripples through the entire FOB. When it became clear her destination was the SCAF, and that she had brought military police with her, the base began to buzz with rumors. Thorne, informed of the general's arrival, assumed it was a VIP visit, a chance for him to showcase his command. He was preparing his briefing when the MPs, acting under Reed's authority, entered the SCIF and put the entire facility on lockdown. No one in, no one out. All network traffic was frozen. General Reed walked into the cold, silent room, her eyes scanning the analysts who were now standing by their stations, confused and intimidated. Her gaze landed on Petrova, who was sitting at her terminal, her expression as calm as ever. "Staff Sergeant Petrova," Reed said, her voice cutting through the silence. "I am Brigadier General Reed. You are to come with me. Your terminal is now evidence." Petrova didn't move. She simply looked up at the general. "Permission to speak, General?" Reed was taken aback by her composure. "Speak. General, what you are looking for is already on my screen. I believe it will save you a great deal of time." Reed was skeptical, but intrigued. She walked behind Petrova's desk, her face a mask of stern authority. She expected to see classified data being exfiltrated, or perhaps communication with a foreign handler. Instead, she saw a file. It was a perfectly formatted, legally sound prosecution memorandum, complete with a table of contents, an executive summary, and hundreds of pages of hyperlinked, verifiable evidence. The title of the document was simple: United States versus Colonel Marcus Thorne. As Reed began to read, her stern expression slowly melted away, replaced by one of stunned disbelief. She saw the evidence of the fuel kickback scheme, the pattern of reprisal against female officers, the blatant contract fraud for the base's own perimeter defenses. It was all there. Every assertion was backed by official documents, financial records, and Thorne's own digital signature. The file was more than just evidence. It was a conviction. General Reed looked from the screen to the quiet staff sergeant. "Who are you?" she asked, the question a genuine expression of awe. Petrova keyed a command, and her own, unclassified service record appeared on a side screen. Reed's eyes widened as she read the lines under previous civilian employment. Senior Forensic Accountant, Department of Justice, White Collar Crime Division. She had also graduated at the top of her class from the Army's most advanced cyber warfare and analysis school. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with stunning clarity. This wasn't an act of espionage. This was an act of justice. General Reed sat down at the adjacent terminal, her hardened demeanor completely gone, replaced by the focused intensity of a prosecutor who had just been handed the case of a lifetime. For nearly an hour, she sat in complete silence, navigating the file Petrova had built. She clicked on hyperlinks that brought up scanned travel vouchers, bank transfer records, and personnel files. She read the damning email exchanges, the threads of corruption and abuse weaving a tapestry of a career built on lies and intimidation. The file was an architectural masterpiece of digital investigation. Every piece of evidence was triple-sourced. Every legal argument was sound. Petrova had not just uncovered crimes. She had built the legal cage to put the criminal in, and it was inescapable. The general finally looked up from the screen. She looked at Petrova, not as an investigator looking at a suspect, but as a senior officer looking at a soldier who had upheld the highest ideals of the service in the face of profound personal abuse. She finally understood. The public humiliation wasn't the reason for the investigation. It was merely the catalyst. It was the mistake that had caused a corrupt colonel to cross paths with a quiet, unassuming warrior who fought not with a rifle, but with data. And in that war, Thorne had been hopelessly, catastrophically outmatched. "Why did you enlist, Sergeant?" Reed asked, her voice soft. Petrova's gaze drifted for a moment to the picture of her parents she had propped up on her desk, the photo now housed in a makeshift frame of folded cardboard. "My father was a command sergeant major," she said quietly. "He believed in the uniform. He believed in what it was supposed to stand for. Someone needed to." It was all the explanation Reed needed. She stood up, her decision made. She looked at the MPs who were still standing guard at the door. "Your investigation is over, Lieutenant," she said to the officer in charge. "The threat has been neutralized." The lieutenant was confused. "But, General, the suspect." General Reed looked at Petrova. "Staff Sergeant Petrova is not a suspect. She is the key witness in a major criminal investigation. This facility is no longer on lockdown by my authority. It is now a crime scene, and all evidence is to be preserved under her supervision." She then turned and made a single, encrypted satellite call to the Pentagon. Her words were quiet, but they carried the weight of a guillotine's blade. "I need a direct line to the Judge Advocate General. I have a situation here with a full-bird colonel." "Yes, sir." The evidence is conclusive. The end of Colonel Marcus Thorne's career was not dramatic. There was no shouting match, no defiant last stand. It was quiet, clinical, and utterly devastating. He was summoned to his own office in the command headquarters, striding in with his usual arrogance, expecting to be briefed on the general's visit. He found Brigadier General Reed sitting behind his desk. His desk. Two stone-faced MPs stood at parade rest by the door. The color drained from Thorne's face. He began to bluster, to demand an explanation, but General Reed cut him off with a single, upraised hand. "Colonel Thorne," she began, her voice calm and devoid of emotion. "Pursuant to Article 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, you are hereby relieved of your command, effective immediately, for conduct unbecoming an officer, fraud, and obstruction of justice, among a dozen other charges that will be detailed in your court-martial." Thorne stood there, sputtering, his world collapsing in on him. He had no allies. He had no defense. He had been so thoroughly and completely outmaneuvered that there was nothing left to say. The entire base watched in stunned, silent disbelief as the man who had ruled them through fear and intimidation was unceremoniously escorted from his own headquarters by the MPs, his face a mask of slack-jawed incomprehension. He was a king who had just discovered the quiet chambermaid was the kingdom's deadliest assassin. Staff Sergeant Petrova was not there to witness his fall. She was back in the SCDF, her fingers flying across her keyboard, tracking a new insurgent cell that had become active in the eastern provinces. She was doing her job. Later that evening, General Reed came to the SCIF one last time. She walked up to Petrova's desk and slid a small, simple wooden picture frame across the surface. It was identical to the one Thorne had destroyed. A silent acknowledgement. A gesture of profound respect. Next to it, she placed a set of transfer orders. "The Judge Advocate General's office has a new cyber forensics unit at the Pentagon," Reed said. "They need a new non-commissioned officer in charge. They requested you specifically." It was a promotion and a new mission. Petrova simply nodded, her eyes fixed on the new frame. Her work at FOB Vigilance was done. She hadn't sought revenge. She had sought justice. And in her quiet, methodical way, she had achieved it, reminding an entire base that the loudest voice in the room is rarely the most powerful.